we had actually begun a conversation with Annapurna and Sindhura saying, how do we bring together an exhibition that's very different, something that the Indian museum fraternity has not really looked at in detail. So Annapurna came up with this fantastic idea, and I think we did whatever we could in terms of organizers and of the exhibition, and in terms of being the director of the exhibition. We went all out. I believe we sourced whatever we could. It turns out that this was probably the most important showing of ceramics in India, of post-independent ceramic practices. So I think without delaying this further, I would like to also thank Peter Nagy, who has graciously accepted to moderate this session for us. And he has been part of various curatorial practices, including with the ceramics triennale, which happened a couple of years ago. So Peter, I'll hand over to you, and thank you everybody. And I'm hoping to enjoy the rest of the session. Thank you.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Thank you, Ashvin. Does everyone hear me? It's working?
Yes,
hello?
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, just thank you, Ashvin. I was fortunate enough to be in Bombay in 2017, and I did see the exhibition, Mutable, and it was wonderful and challenging and beautifully designed, and I had quite a bit of time to spend with it. So it's wonderful now to see that exhibition turned into a book, which is much more than just a catalog for the exhibition, because of the time and the budget has been given to the people that specifically jackfruit design, which in this case is Sindhura DM and Annapurna Garamela. They had curated the exhibition and did the exhibition design for the show in Bombay, and now they have led the book and put the book together. But it's much more, as I said, much more than just a simple catalog of the exhibition. It is a comprehensive study of the history of ceramic arts in India since independence, and for that reason it's now a fantastic piece of source material. If I can just paraphrase from Annapurna's introduction to the book, she says, Mutable is a watershed curatorial project, and now a book, because it is showcasing all kinds of clay work on a single platform, and sought to think through their coexistence and their differences without reinforcing or imposing existing hierarchical positions in the research, curation, or exhibition design. So really, I mean, you're looking at all the possible forms and uses that clay takes, both functional and fine art and everything in between. And that's the way the exhibition was set up. It was sort of chronological, but at the same time dovetailing and interlacing both functional ceramics, commercial ceramics, and fine art ceramics, and studio pottery. So bringing all these different categories together and looking at them more from historical perspectives. What were the impetus and the people involved in each of these times and moments that also codified into a certain aesthetic. You could see an aesthetic similarity between the purely functional and the artistic and the things in between. Also coming from Annapurna's introduction, she says the book does not emphasize either material or conceptual purity. Instead, it focuses on crossovers, confusions, and hybridity within various kinds of making as extremely productive processes. So again, opening up the field, not just looking at what artists make using ceramics or studio pottery, things like that, but looking at the whole range of things, which is a actually very complicated issue. Most people might be aware that ceramics recently, say in just the last 10 years, has become an extremely sought after and trendy material and medium in the fine art world, especially in the West, especially say in New York and London, where it had been sort of pushed aside and seen as craft for many, many years. And now ceramics along with fiber art have really been brought into the fine art canon and very much the fine art market and the museum spaces. And that's been a very healthy development in the Western art world, specifically the museum space and the gallery market. Unfortunately, I can't say we can say that that has really happened in the Indian context, only because of the much different context, sizes of the institutions, the size of the market. It's happened a bit, but not to the extent that it has happened in, say, New York and London. So there's still growth that has to be done in India. And I think some of the subjects our writers will touch upon will reflect this complexity of and the difficulties within the specific context of India. I have just a few questions for our writers of the book, and I'd like to start with Annapurna Garamela, who conceived the exhibition. She's from Jackfruit Design Research in Bangalore, and she wrote the introduction for the book Mutable. And in the very beginning of her introduction, she makes a statement that really perplexed me, and I wanted to bring that up to her. She says, and I quote, "The book also discusses, following the exhibition, works made outside of any specific ideological or institutional framework." And to me, I don't see how anything can exist outside of any sort of ideological or institutional framework. So I'd like Annapurna, if she could elaborate on this. What exactly, how do any of us or any objects not end up in some sort of ideological or institutional framework? Annapurna?
Well, Peter, I'm not going to turn on the camera because we're having a little internet problem here. But thank you so much for, first of all, for being involved. I always love your questions. And I also want to thank, because we're beginning now, the Piramal Museum and ArtX and all the technical people behind this thing to make today's event possible. And I'd like to particularly thank Kristine, Michael, and Mappin Publications for bringing out this gorgeous book. Now, to address this wonderful question that you posed with me with that impish smile, which I can see your face, but you can't see mine. So what I want to say is the key word is not ideological or institutional, but the word is specific. Because there are many people in this exhibition and many works in this exhibition who did not have, as they say in Hindi, a nigah. They were under no institutional or ideological canopy when they produced those works or developed those ideas. So for example, someone like Gurcharan Singh Ji, who did this fabulous work over an enormously long career, many moments wove in and out of Swadeshi, wove in and out of Minge, and wove in and out of like his idea of what post-partition India should be like. But there were also moments when he was just kind of like a guy doing a business. So I wanted to say that, make that space that not every practice is always neatly linked to Nehruvian policies or Gandhian ideas of self-sufficiency, or even post-liberalization ideas of consumer wealth and consumer expenditure as a vehicle for personal and national growth. So that was what I was trying to say, was to hold that space open. But thank you for a wonderful question.
Okay, so I see. So we're being specific about the word specific here as well.
Exactly. Thank you for holding on.
So, but in your example though, he is, what you're talking more about is a fluidity and a transgression. He is, of course, at times under different ideological or institutional concepts or paradigms, and he's shifting, he's mutating between them, he's oscillating. He doesn't have a specific allegiance to one or the other. He's taking inspiration but also patronage and things from many different frameworks, is what you were trying to say.
Yes, I think the word you used was mutate and shift. And I think that's really important because, you know, the way that art history is written in especially in certain areas in our country, by certain approaches, is to say that a certain ideology is important and we must follow that, even in the way that we narrate the story. But what I'd rather talk about is when you have a marginal material, but with a very rich set of practitioners, there's a lot of mutation, and these careers are vast. Nirmala Patwardhan, Gursharan Singh Ji, B.R. Pandit, so many people have like 60, 70 years of practice under their belt. So it's very hard to be consistent over 60 or 70 years in a kind of rigid way, right? Like, and also because our import and export laws for materials change so frequently. Guru Sharan Singh, for example, was his allegiance and his consistency was for ceramics, and to make ceramics an important thing. His consistency and his commitment was to exploring the local. His consistency and his commitment was to stoneware. So these are the kinds of things, and for example, slip covered pottery, right? Local pottery. So I would that privileges, that approach privileges makers over ideologues or institutions.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's going back to that quote that you end your introduction with, that a book emphasizes crossovers, confusions, and hybridity within various kinds of making, which is exactly, I think, more and more what we're seeing all fields of art history going towards. I mean, there has always been a sort of an impetus to perhaps, define things as succinctly as possible, to put people into isms or camps so that they can be quickly understood. And all of us are realizing now that that's really, I mean, I think a form of violence, really, because it isn't acknowledging, as you said, 50, 60 years of a practice that has to be done. That also has to please many different people along the line, and
he was a very good businessman. He was a super good businessman.
Just to function economically, people have to figure out how to make a living with their practice, but they also, want to do other things and that aren't kind of making money and all that. And then within a context of India, again, where there's fewer ways, I think, to ameliorate your artistic practice than there are in other parts of the world. Okay, well, thank you very much, Annapurna. And I'm going to turn now to Kristine, who has written the first essay in the book, Mutable Indian Ceramics in a State of Flux. And Kristine's essay is very much a sort of study of four figures that are quite pivotal and important in the development of ceramic arts in India, and how we think about them. And so she goes into great detail, and it's very valuable for the wealth of information she gives on each of these people. First, she deals with Gujran Singh of Delhi blue pottery, and when I say she deals with, she's not only she's dealing with his life, his work, in all aspects of that, but then also reading the work and talking about the work in purely connoisseurship style. So she's dealing with stylistics. I mean, she's really fleshing out the figure and the practice and the objects for us. So it's really based on Gujran Singh of Delhi blue pottery, and then Kripal Singh Sekravat of Jaipur is practicing in Jaipur, and then the married couple pair of Americans, Deborah Smith and Ray Meeker, who have settled and are still based in Pondicherry, and their organization, Golden Bridge Pottery, which starts out as a commercial and continues as a commercial ceramic studio, but then also dovetails with Ray's work as an artist and a teacher, and he begats generations of fantastic ceramic artists. So that's really the great crux of Kristine's essay, and why it's so valuable looking at these four figures. But I wanted to ask Kristine specifically because she talks about the building of nationalist identity and how each of these people did that through their practice of being ceramic artists or commercial potters, or however you want to terminalize it, which is always problematic. So I wanted to ask Kristine, with her knowledge of this history and where we are today, how do you see the role, because you are yourself a practicing ceramic artiste and a scholar and a curator and very involved with the form on many different levels. Where do you see now the place of the ceramic artist in India, specifically as a political being, as their relationship with the nation state, for themselves as the body politic, for their wares, how they distribute or exhibit what they make? I mean, how do you fit into the larger political, social political structure that we're in? Is there an answer?
Right. Thank you, Peter, for your kind comments about the essay that I've done for the book. But before I answer your question, I would like to thank Annapurna and Sindhura for bringing out this beautifully designed book. It is a real labor of love, and it's taken them 3 years. And also Ashwin of Piramal, for seeing that this was an opportunity to make such a great contribution to the whole field of Indian pottery, not just with the exhibition, but with the book as well. So just for a bit of background, in 2017, when Sindhura and Annapurna had started their research, I was the guest editor for an issue of Marg magazine on Indian pottery history and practice with Jyotinder Jain and also Naman Ahuja, who I also must thank, both of them, for their long conversations with me at the time, which gave me a lot of clarity on the scope and the impact that the material has had on artists, on craftspeople, architects, designers. And it's this negotiating of the modern with the traditional that one sees in clay through a vast and varied landscape of artistic interventions. And it is really wonderful that the book Mutable brings out in so much detail several strands that were in the Marg issue, but of course we just had it very, very narrow little articles. But it was these untold stories that are there in great detail of transnational modernism and the changing vernacular practices and design interventions and the regional growth of contemporary practices. And it is really in the revealing of the threads of this genealogy that a picture starts to emerge of the modern artist, craftsman, designer in India in our changing social framework for the 21st century. And you're absolutely right, Peter. This is the crafts moment in the art world right now. And clay and fiber are right at the forefront of being re-looked at, re-sort of discovered, and re-sort of visited all over the world. So moving on to my essay, I discuss some of the figures of the transnational impact on our local narratives. So for example, the first one is of course the India-Japan connection in the impact of the Mingay movement, which shaped a great deal of the early practitioners, their ideology, such as Kripal Singh Shekhawat of Jaipur, Gurcharan Singh of Delhi, and later Deborah Smith and Ray Meeker of Pondicherry. But it was also in a pan-Asian sort of a movement with Ogakura tension earlier on in the early 20th century with Tagore at Shantiniketan and Sriniketan, with Bengal School of Artists. And these artists took up clay as a medium to work with or paint on. And we have examples from Jamini Roy, from K.G. Subramanyam, Bhupen Kakkar, Lakshma Gaud, Latika Kat, Dilu Mukherjee. I mean, the list is endless. But elsewhere, the book also discusses the important Bauhaus design exhibition, which was hosted by Tagore in the 20s there in Calcutta. And then 30 years later, design education, the entire Bauhaus style and format comes into India 30 years later, post-independence, with the start of NID. And this leads into a lot of design interventions in small-scale industry and the craft sector. The other transnational impact was the India-UK, the arts and crafts movement, with, of course, Indians like Mansaran Singh working with Bernard Leach and also Devi Prasad and others. Now, all these people, the early pioneers, provided the foundation for the 20th century studio pottery movement And they also brought in a great deal of educational pedagogy and the alternative philosophy that sustains it. And to come back to your question in terms of the national movement, Gandhian and socialist ideals were at the heart of the years of work that, somebody like Devi Prasad did in Sevagram, for example. And also, he also worked a great deal with the Khadi and Village Commission. And so did Kalindi Jaina, as well as the revival of the Jaipur blue pottery by of course, Kripal Singh Shekhawat, supported by Kamla Devi Chattopadhyay. So along with Khadi, the Swadeshi ideals also included clay work and pottery. And there's been considerable interventions, like, Dashat Patel's work at Sevapuri and other NID projects with other design graduates from Bombay, from Anand, from Kerala, Manipur, etc. And of course, to learn more about this fascinating story, one must buy and read the book in case you've missed the exhibition. So over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Kristine. Most of the book is written by Sindhura DM, and she goes into great detail and many, many different levels of ceramic production, and again, on every possible level, from we're looking at the Mangalore roof tiles to all sorts of teacups, how there's the sort of back and forth synthesis between the Japanese tea ceremony, the colonial era, bringing in the domestication and ritualization of tea within the Indian home, and how that affects ceramic production, the decoration of ceramic production. It's really such a vast subject on so many different levels. It's really quite amazing. One of the most interesting parts of Sindhura's essay to me is when she talks about objects of transition, because again, I think we're seeing, again, when we talk about painting or sculpture, these are pretty, in some ways, very finite forms that have very, prescribed parameters of what they will do, where they will be seen, and in what sort of market they function. But again, with these ceramics, these paradigms, these parameters are completely blown apart. And so it's very interesting when she talks about objects of transition, and I quote here from a part of her essay. She says, "Many hereditary potters diversify their work rather than move away from their craft. Both families, for these are families of hereditary potters, would adopt new techniques and create objects for galleries, museums, and public spaces, such as airports, thereby developing a different clientele. In the process, they have changed their conventional forms, or perhaps we could also say functional forms, to more individualized ones, or perhaps more fine art forms." So we're looking at, again, the context and the economics of the development of modernism in India and how that affects what people choose to make. They have to have opportunities, right? They have to have opportunities for making money, but also for having these things seen and in what sort of context. So institutions, as she says, such as galleries, museums, but also public spaces such as airports. Now we see malls, these sort of public spaces, mostly also both private and government, become very, very important on developing the language and giving the agency to the actual practitioners. I would like to ask Sindhura for the first question. I think a lot of people may be turning into a launch on a book about ceramics would be surprised that we're talking about politics. So Kristine touched on the subject a bit, but if you could, Sindhura, perhaps just specifically point out specific practitioners working with ceramics and specific political movements or agendas that they can be identified with. Going back to the original, when we were talking with Annapurna about ideologies that people may be associated with, and therefore their practice is influenced by.
Thank you, Peter, for asking such a wonderful question and also giving an insight to the book. And I'm going to answer this question with the three examples from the book and also from the exhibition. And I'm going to start with the Mangalore tile factory, which was started by Basel Mission in 1860 on the banks of River Netravati, Mangalore. And it was started because they wanted to provide jobs for the converts, for people who converted into Christianity. And when they started the factory, there was a lot of intercaste marriages were began to happen, and also female workers started to work. And this kind of brings in an aspect of like the social and political change in the ceramic history. And perhaps this is also the beginning of the industrialization, where if you go to Basel Mission website and archive, you can see many photographs, and where you see people lined up carrying clay and using mold to make bricks and roof tiles. And it talks about all the new things that were happening in perhaps in Europe, and Europe kind of brought into India. And that's one aspect of one example of it. And the other one is B.R. Pandit's work, who is born in hereditary Potter family in Bihar. And during 1960s famine, several organization provided relief work to Bihar. And especially the Indira Gandhi, who was the prime minister at the time, invited Jai Prakash Narayan, who was a Gandhian, to work for famine relief using green revolution strategies. So during this, agricultural industrialization happened. And B.R. Pandit started to make irrigation pipe using low-fired clay. And also in 1969, he joined Central Village Pottery Institute, Kanpur, Belgaum, Karnataka, and where he learned how to use new modern technologies like jolly machines, and how to make molds and glaze and several other things. And by 1980s, Pandit practice moved towards becoming an artist and a studio potter from a rural potter. So this happened in an urban setting. So that means that he got order works from individual collectors or from the institution to make a large scale murals or to a parts. And in 1989, he goes to Japan, and then he was very impacted by the use of clay and the textures, glaze, and especially Hamada's way of use of glaze. And then he kind of picks those kind of elements and then brings it back to his studio, which is set up in Mumbai, and then starts experimenting. It's not by any formal training or anything, but by looking at other people. Yes, he had the training in Kadi Gramodyoga and other pottery institute, but also by watching other people and listening to other people and talking to other people. He had conversation with Nirmala Patwardhan, who was an expert in glazes, and Ira Chaudhary, and he starts to make vase and other kind of forms, which has very interesting textures. For example, in the exhibition in the book, if you see, there's a blue color vase, where it's a very conventional form which he's familiar with from his practice, and then it might have come from a hereditary practice. People made vases, hereditary potter made vases. But what he does is uses glaze, and it's also on a stoneware, which is a very new material. Hereditary potter uses very low-fired clay and red clay, locally available clay. And he uses slip cast and then heats it, slip process, and then uses heat to kind of crack the surface, and then which kind of give a glazing effects. And this is also kind of all this kind of learned, he came to know about through several interactions and several exhibitions which might have happened during after the post-independence, and when the craft museum did exhibitions, and also people from Japan and US and came to India during the Pan-Asian movement, and also the interest in philosophy. So you can see how he takes all this movement and then brings it in his work. And lastly, I think the contemporary ceramist Madhuri Subramanyam, who kind of makes installation-based work, and particularly in her work, heriographics, which talks about migration and migration, and and also she's also talking about the way that she moved from city to city, and country to country. And you can see how ceramist or a studio potter or hereditary potter are kind of taking all these social political movements or economical movement and then bringing back to their practice. And there are many other potters or makers in the book who has a similar kind of a practice.
I guess what I sort of would like to ask more is if we can bring bring the discussion more to the present day. We know about certain festivals of India and cottage industries, emporiums, and things like that were set up in the 1960s and helped the craftspeople very much, the Crafts Museum. But to me, I mean, these things seem to have lost their, while they still exist, they've lost a lot of their energy. I wonder what specific things the government of India has in terms of institutional structures, done for ceramic arts specifically, but I think probably when we talk about ceramic arts, we'll probably have to talk about what they're doing for crafts in general, and ceramics being a subset of that. But I'm interested in actual examples that we can point to, or are we actually pointing to a lack of examples, unfortunately, and have to say that really everything in the last 20 years that has empowered and diversified the audience and the scope of exhibitions for ceramic arts has really come more from the private sector, and such as developments of airports, malls, hotels, things like that. I mean, is the government paying any attention to these things?
I cannot really say that government is not doing anything, but I also cannot say that it is doing everything. And
but we cannot point to a specific institution that the government has created in the last 20 years for any sort of craft. I mean, we've seen, unfortunately, the Crafts Museum in Delhi be a bit, dismantled. And
I'm happy to come in and share some thoughts about this, about funding. So
I have some thoughts on this. I will. Can I share this with Peter?
Of course.
Please do.
So the government has, have a lot of program, and recently they came with a program where they want to collaborate with institutions such as NID, NIFT, and IIT, and many other institutions to train potters, and not only hereditary potters, non-hereditary potter as well, to develop a skill and also make new products for India, new urban India. And other thing that what government is pushing is to in a tile factory and sanitization industry, because India is one of the third largest producer of manufacturer of tiles and sanitization ware. And what they're doing is, they're building many infrastructure. Thus, they want tiles and floor tiles, wall tiles, and other things. And they're saying that, we will, if you get trained, and then you can go join to a so-and-so company, and then you will get a revenue, and we will also get a revenue. And this is a program that you can go and join and learn new things. And also, whatever the program that was set up after the 1947, when India got the independence, and that still continues. And then they have a program in Khadi Gramodyog village industry, and then there's a ceramic institute, and where everybody, all the potter, whoever joins, they get trained to use new materials, like how to use stoneware, and then how to prepare clay, and then how to use glazes. And in some cases, they're also given subsidized price machines, and they also give loans, and then they provide those kind of a support. And also, I think recently, I think Bihar and UP government is really trying hard to support potters, and they're giving free kick wheels and things like that.
Okay, but unfortunately, nothing on the international scale now. When so much of the world is interested in ceramic production, we're not seeing the Indian government really sending exhibitions out of the country. As you know, there's only been one official involvement with the Venice Biennale because of a private museum organizing that. No more festivals of India. Even, unfortunately, the Triennale of India, the Laliत Kala Academy used to host in Delhi. There used to be wonderful displays of ceramic arts brought in by other countries. I remember Japan and other countries would bring in beautiful exhibitions to see that. So, Kristine, did you have something to add on this subject?
Yeah, I did. Thank you very much, Peter. I just wanted to, sorry, somebody just said to start my video. Okay, there I am again. All right. So yes, you're absolutely right. It is the private sector that is doing the major amount of support. I mean, the private gallery scene, the private museums, etc., are really doing an incredible job. And of course, it started with the Delhi Blue Pottery that has done stalwart work throughout the years. There's also been the Light Publication Ceramic Center there in Baroda, which has been, really a huge center for the growth in sort of West India. And there have been a lot of recent ceramic residencies at Maihar, at Art Ichol, and other sorts of residencies that have helped with, I know that Dakshina Chitra has hosted, a great deal of sort of ceramic residencies, along with the Inco Center, with the Korean Center. So there have been this exchange of Korean artists and Indian artists. So the private support is really flourishing. And of course, we've had in 2018, the Indian Ceramics Triennale, which was the first of its kind, which really gave an international platform to the entire ceramic art that was going on in India. And recently, from sort of Calcutta, we've got the Indian Ceramics Art Foundation, the ICAF, which is just taking off. But again, there have been scholarships and things. I mean, the Charles Wallace has for years sent artists to the UK to continue with the UK-India sort of connection. And you will see a whole lot of artists who are sort of currently right there in the thick of things right now have all been on the Charles Wallace. And that's something that has been really fantastic. So also the INLACs and also the Commonwealth Scholarship. So these are the 2 or 3 things that.
And I think the Fulbright program has supported quite a lot of ceramic artists, hasn't it?
Yes, 102, definitely.
I thought many more than 102. I mean, it was interesting the case with the ceramic triennale, because I was very involved with that it was started by a group of ceramic artists themselves to do it, and then they went out, and then they were lucky to get the support of the Jawaharlal Kala Kendra in Jaipur as not only the venue, but at that point the JKK gave them a sizable amount of money to organize and put together the exhibition. So that was specifically funds coming from the government of Rajasthan. But then the government of Rajasthan, the party changed, and even the money that was going to revitalize JKK was dried up. So unfortunately, we're not seeing, it's sort of struggling to even have a second edition, the ceramic triennale.
Yes,
so
but we hope that it'll happen again. And so also the IFAC Studio Pottery Show, which started back in the 1980s, along with Daddy G. He was the first one. And in fact, the Lalit Kala Academy did not recognize ceramics right up to the mid 80s. It was only after the IFAC Studio Pottery Show started that, that the Lalit Kala and also the Ministry of Culture accepted ceramics. And I must say, senior artists like, sort of the Rose and Gauri Khosla and other people like that, Ira Chaudhary, were instrumental in this acceptance at the national level.
They had a lobby for it, you said. They really had to push the agenda to make it happen.
Ira Chaudhary, yes, absolutely, with their constant, very steady work and the impact that this had.
I think that has to happen on all platforms for the culture of India, and artists have to be more aggressive to get their government to do much more for everything. Because the artists aren't going to demand it, who else is going to do it, right?
Please, in a second. She's been trying to get an award edgewise. She just wants to say a few things. Please say.
Please.
Okay. So, Kristine, pointed out to several people who went to abroad, and I want to tell a really interesting workshop that happened, which was organized by Australian potter Sandra Buwaket. And she worked with many hereditary potters from Uttamnagar, and then she took them to Australia and with the help of Australian government and did workshop there. And then in that process, they got to try many new kind of a local Australian clay. And then, for example, if you see Bhunesh Prasad's work, and then he kind of started to begin to think about how to sign my work, and also how to make a shape which is looks like a functional wear or a decorative wear, but also for a gallery exhibition. So these are the very interesting things that happen through other government institutional intervention.
Interesting. Do I have time for another question? I had another question for Sindhura, or are we?
I want to say something, Peter, Kristine, and you raised a very good question, but I want to just step back for a second, because finally this is a historical project and it's important to say something about that. After 1947, we have a government that's deeply invested in doing developmental work in India. And crafts, because you raised this question of crafts, is very important because India has no foreign currency. Its foreign exchange is zero. So following the model of the British, who use crafts for increasing the coffers of the crown through trade in textiles, the Indian government too, of the Indian independent nation, also turned to crafts to increase the revenue, foreign exchange that was coming into the country. So this idea of government intervention into the crafts, including ceramics, including clay and hereditary potters, was positioned at one end as a welfare states activity. At another end, it was positioned as preserving heritage. And at a third end, it was presented as an economic activity that would help the country. After 1991, when liberalization happened, and we have a new kind of approach, so there's still government intervention, but no longer is the government really pushing craftspeople of any kind of many varieties to see themselves as recipients of welfare, but they are being positioned as potential entrepreneurs. So for example, when we think about Mansukh Bhai Prajapati, who is featured in the book as the designer and maker of the Mitti Cool refrigerator, which he developed after the Gujarat earthquake, he was put into touch with this thing called the Honeybee Network. And the Honeybee Network is a thing that comes out of IIM Ahmedabad. And these things come together. And suddenly Mansukh Bhai Prajapati is not just a Prajapati working in rural, earthquake-ridden, affected, impacted Gujarat, but he's positioned as this incredibly inventive entrepreneur. But that comes with a lot of burden. If you position somebody as an entrepreneur, they don't get the same access to largesse that a welfare recipient might get, because their job is to transition into then creating more revenue for themselves and for the nation state and for local economies and those kinds of things. So it's really important to position any government intervention into a proper ideological and economic framework. Those festivals of India were very important. And artists, of course, are great because they take these opportunities and they make their own thing out of it, which you're very right to point out. They were wonderful objects produced. But much of those projects were also about marketing India abroad. And it was very important to Upal Jaikar and the whole regime of designers and curators that were, or supervisors, middle order professionals who were intervening in the craft sector to create these bridges in order to produce a certain kind of economic space for India in the international realm. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
But I understand. I mean, a lot of things changed in '91 with liberalization of the economy. But if you're saying now the government then emphasizes or encourages these practitioners to enter into the more entrepreneurial business space, is there any help? I mean, is there, we were talking about all the, someone was saying about how there was a lot of help with the rural potters, teaching them new techniques so they could diversify their product. So it had new markets, things like that, the interface with design schools that's happening, NIFT and these sort of things. I mean, if the government wants to take these people and see them as moving into an entrepreneurial role, are they assisting them with what's necessary in terms of accounting backup and some business skills and communication and logistical information and knowledge? Is that happening, or they just sort of say, go do it yourself, and they're left high and dry?
No,
I think it's happening in small pockets, Peter and Annapurna, but it's a drop in the ocean because there are hundreds of thousands, millions of potters. And unfortunately, the sort of second generation or the third or fourth generation is now, choosing to not continue with the trade, with the craft, simply because they just are not seeing a future in it. So it is a drop in the ocean. There are a lot of different initiatives going on, and sort of design-wise, sort of technology-wise, etc. But yes, it is something that India has always had as one of the rich crafts of India, and it would be a real pity if more support was not found for it.
Peter,
well, building those interface bridges between the business community and the design community and the traditional craftspeople is what's needed, right?
Peter, I would like to add something to your previous question. And, yes, government is doing certain things, under the institution, they do have program to train people to how to do a business. Apart from that, when any hereditary potter collaborates with boutiques or a designer, they were also taught in a way how to maintain an account, and then how to take a photographs and send it and through WhatsApp, and then how to do an Excel sheet. And interestingly, when I started this research in 2017 for the exhibition, it was a time where GST came. And I went to Kutch, and where all potters or any craftsmen are they were talking about, should we register for GST? Should we not register for GST? And if we register, what are the problems? And also, the many designers are telling them you should get a registration, or you should be learning these kind of things. Otherwise, we won't do a business. So they don't have any other choice than learning or doing such things. So I think we can't just rely on the government institution. We also have to or any partner also have to use whatever the knowledge that he has, along with the collaboration that he does, and also whatever the government provides.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't think the government has to do everything, but it's interesting just looking at these nexuses, again, these bridges that are built that enable people to survive by their practices and hopefully flourish both, financially, but also aesthetically, to push everything forward. I think that's one of the great things about this book is the detail that especially Sindhura has gone into about these different practitioners in different parts of the country, coming from different contexts, and how they moved into other contexts, and the systems of support and the overlapping networks that are built, which in each case are very unique and individual, and it can show us pathways for the future, for the present and the future, moving ahead. How are artists supposed to, get the job done and, live and support themselves? Perhaps we should open to questions from the audience now, Deepti.
Yes, there's a comment which I've sent to you, Peter, which you can look at.
This one from Facebook, someone says, it's a fantastic workshop of a month. I guess they're telling us about something that happened. A fantastic workshop of a month with 10 ceramic artists from India was held at Pari Vartan campus, Siwan in Bihar. It was organized by the Art Sheila Foundation last year. We were there, and in fact, clay artists from Bengal are also doing well now. I wonder how they're doing. I know that there was one artist from Calcutta who I was saw his work for the first time at the Ceramic Triennale in Jaipur, and he really doesn't have to rely on the gallery space or the exhibition space or the art market at all, because he's able to support himself just from the lucrative pandal market. It's kind of like fashion designers that support themselves just from the wedding market. This guy is able to support himself just by the commissions he gets for designing and creating pandals for Durga Puja once a year. And I think probably he does more than one, so that's enough. That's enough of an income that allows him to do his own artwork for the rest of the year, but not have to market it that ambitiously. So that's interesting, that interesting ways tradition interfaces with that. What I liked very much, Annapurna and Sindhura, with the exhibition, how you designed it and you explained about it, that what you liked very much about the Piramal Museum space, because it is a very large lobby space in a multi-use skyscraper in Bombay, and so therefore it is a space of transition which people are moving through in multiple directions, and the museum and the exhibition was really set up on an island in the middle of that space. So it really was, it wasn't linear at all, which was wonderful. It enabled you to see objects and you walked around it. Could you talk a little bit more about the challenges and the decisions that were made in that, Annapurna, for putting together the exhibition?
Thank you for asking about the design of the exhibition. I have to say that the design came out of conversation with Sindhura because of the kind of approach she was taking, where each area like shift, form, perception, object, all of these specific areas needed to be in dialogue with each other, and there shouldn't be in hierarchy. So whereas maybe for some exhibitions or curators, that space would be odd, for us, we loved its disobedientness. We called it a disobedient space because it doesn't follow the rules of conventional museums and conventional gallery spaces. So it could, as you mentioned, it could be entered from different directions. And Ashwin was very clear that we could dismantle the existing display area and reconstruct it. So that was done almost within a very short period of time, a week or so. And then we decided that we wanted to create a landscape. Like India is there to be ups and downs in this landscape. So some things were on pedestals, some things were on floors, and some things could be in the line of sight of each other, but they were in different sections. I'm going to turn off the video. They were in different sections.
We have some pictures of the exhibition, though. I don't know what happened to those.
That would be so great to see. Yeah.
Ta-da!
Yeah.
There it is.
There. So you can see that, you can see that the exhibition is very much oriented towards creating conversations between objects. We made choices, for example, to turn over certain objects that were commercially produced, certain parts of multiples, so that people could see how like a factory like Bharat Potteries or Hitkari would put their stamp on this and create a sense of authorship. Where does an artist put a sense of their authorship or ownership? All these kinds of things. So for us, this space was very productive and meaningful, because it was so, in a way, the space itself mimicked the status of ceramics, right? Like it's a different kind of disobedient space, and ceramics is a disobedient kind of material. It refuses to be completely craft. It also becomes art, it becomes industry, it becomes something hereditary, all these things.
Fantastic. And so people now can see in the pictures how teacups and functional objects are displayed right next to completely esoteric artworks and everything in between. There are traditional and also traditional figurines. So things were produced for sacred spaces and things that were produced for secular spaces next to each other. And these are pictures of actual objects in the exhibition and now in the book. So the book does very much follow the program. Can we talk, Sindhura, about what you've been able to do in the book with more time and space that you were not able to do in the exhibition?
What we did was to kind of, through the exhibition, to bring all kinds of maker to one platform. I mean, I'm using a word maker because we didn't want it to create a hierarchy in calling someone a hereditary potter or a studio potter or an artist, or this is from a certain industry. So the word that we use to kind of describe is a maker throughout the exhibition, also through the book. And it showcased in the SIFT section, it showcased especially people from studio pottery who made functional way to sell, and also made artworks to showcase in the galleries. And in the object section, we showcased artists who used clay as one of their mediums. And in farm section, we showcased hereditary potters' works. And in utility section, we showcased mass-produced ceramics or from designers or NID works. And in perception, what we did was looked at a particular farm surai, which is a water pot from a various makers, such as we showcased someone who studio pottery, and also from a designer as well as a hereditary potter, to see what they think about one particular form, and then how they kind of make a functional wear, or maybe it's a decorative wear. And so that was the whole exhibition was about. And also kind of it also kind of talked about how people moved between different spaces. And when we kind of started doing the research, and then during the field work and reading several other books, what was important was to look at how hereditary potter has taken a space. And for example, hereditary potter is worked in a studio pottery setting. For example, he can also go into a SIFT section, or he could also go into an object section where he taught in art schools or design school. Or the hereditary potter can also work in an industry, and also he can have his own workshop. So in this exhibition, you can see, like the center of the pot, we have a big work from Giriraj Prasad, who is from a hereditary potter, to say that yes, there are different kinds of pottery practice exist, but hereditary potter kind of becomes a main person who has a skill and who know how to handle material and who can adopt new things, and he can move between all these spaces. And that was, I think, the big thing that we did in this exhibition.
I want to add one thing here, because this is really Sindhura's great intervention, and I think I'm very happy with this, is that in Indian art history, we don't yet have a language to talk about caste. and making. And what she managed to do was to create a dialogue in the book about the hereditary potter as a person who is the infrastructure on which industrial pottery relied on which educational pottery institutions relied on, which fine art practitioners relied on, and which they themselves rely on for their own mobility, right? Their own social and professional mobility. And we need, I think the great project ahead for us, since we've been talking between ourselves and with several colleagues, is to think about how do we talk about hereditary practitioners or people who are coming from certain caste backgrounds and have access to certain government programs and certain institutional spaces. How do they enter into a vast landscape which sees itself as almost outside of caste? The art historical landscape, which sees itself as outside of caste. We are really interested in exploring this. We don't have a lot of answers right now because this is a huge project, but we would like to explore this. And this her great contribution in this book was to put the hereditary potter at the center of the ceramic moment now.
Amazing. And that would have implications for the study of any craft forms in India, which I imagine also then you have particularities, say in Bengal, that would be different, the hereditary potter that would be different because the production is different. And, you know, say the differences between some people working in Tamil Nadu or Bengal or Gujarat could be very, very different, right?
That's right.
Which leads always to a larger question, which is a lot of work needs to be done in India, is this space of crafts and the way crafts were sort of relegated to government sponsorship for so long, and then they sort of dropped the ball, but at the same time, it was not it's not able to be taken up by the fine art urban market. I mean, there's such a great divide between these types of production in the country, their outlets for exhibition and sale, and so consequently the values of these things. I mean, there's such a chasm now between you know, traditional tribal arts and crafts from all over the country and, say, the urban artists, which doesn't exist in other parts of the country. That chasm is closing up, especially if you look at Australia and how their indigenous tribal artists have become the national, you know, art stars. You know, they are not only front and center, they are probably the, you know, the height of, they are put on the top of the pile, really. And we're seeing that now more and more in the United States starting to happen with these indigenous traditional forms and their contemporized versions being much more just simply appreciated and valued. And they're so, the chasm between these spaces and the history of the context that was built for the craft artists, the tribal artists in this country, and where they are now is I mean, it's a very sad situation, and but there's also so much work has to be done.
Peter, you know, I want to just bring this back to the way that we spoke around 2010, when Vernacular in the Contemporary was happening at
the Devi Art Foundation.
Yeah, the Devi Art Foundation was beginning to sort of plot the sort of interventionary methodology, maybe a curatorial methodology that even Mutable continues. What I really think is that India has its own narrative, and you know this, you said it in your own work. It has its own trajectory in contemporary art, it has its own trajectory in the art world, and you have done remarkable work, you and many other gallerists have done remarkable work in making these bridges between the global art scene and what's happening in India. I think that maybe one great advantage, I'm not sure, and this is a genuine I'm not sure, it's not like a rhetorical I'm not sure. I'm not sure that all global art spaces are equally tonic or salutary for all art forms. And we know this because what happened to Jangar Singh Sham, or what is happening to many other artists as the prices of artists who come from the folk art world or community-based art world, or the Adivasi communities are being intersected. So for example, you know, this project where Bhaju Sham's work is interlaced with an Aboriginal artist whose name I have forgotten, please forgive me, for a scenographic project at a very major industrialist home in Gujarat. And one is Australian, one is Indian. This industrialist Adani has one foot in both countries in the mining industry, and both places the Adivasi lands are being taken over and being mined relentlessly. And all of this is there in the art world too. So the art world is very complex space. It is not an easily reconcilable sector. And I think it's the task of discussions like this and work like this, and your very pointed, sharp questions that will help us even begin to address these things. I hope I've fleshed it out a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a highly problematic space, but we have to think about it and talk about it, because at the end of the day, there's just fabulous objects and works of art that are being lost. They're not being preserved. They're not being valued by the society overall. And so how do we build the institutions to value and preserve these objects, and, you know, and thereby, you know, hopefully benefit the practitioners, the people that make them while they're living. Anyway. I don't know how much longer this is going to go on. We can close when we're ready. I'm ready. Ashwin, again, it's a wonderful book. I don't know, maybe, I know there's books, you know, that come out of the US about, ceramic art today, but that's always very much, you know, the fine art space, and they'll be looking at, say, just production from the last 10 years. I've seen books like that. I've never seen a book like this that looks at a country's history of dealing with such, again, the diversity of a singular material, and trying to both tackle and wrap up that. And we have to congratulate the three of you for putting this together. It seems like a major achievement, and really points the way towards, for me, it points the way towards not exhibitions. And the vast amount of material that we still have to see on different levels. So thank you again for all your efforts, and thank you to the Garimella Museum of Art for not only for organizing the exhibition, which they're always doing wonderful exhibitions in Bombay, but also seeing it through with this wonderful book. Ashwin, can you tell us where the book will be available for everyone who's going to run out tomorrow to buy it?
Absolutely. You don't have to run out and buy it. The books are available on Amazon for everybody's convenience.
But you can go to your local brick and mortar bookseller.
The brick and mortar booksellers will have them soon because of the current situations and many people not wanting to go out and run and buy stuff. But yeah, I mean, Mappin is distributing this to all the bookstores worldwide, and it will be available at libraries and museum stores across the world. But currently it's available on Amazon in India, and we have a special discounted rate going on for the book for the next 15 days. So if you reach out to the Piramal Museum office, we'll be able to help you with that. There is a discount of 15% on the book.
So the book will cost how much if you buy it tomorrow?
It's 1,700. The price of the book is 1,950, and you get it for 1,750.
Fantastic.
That's my sales.
What a deal! What a deal!
No, but either way, I mean, the book it really is a record of nearly 60 years of Indian ceramic art, and I mean, it's, as the show was very exciting for us to put up, and the book has kind of absolutely captured every element of that. It's stuff that most people have taken for granted, and I know some people have seen this book and like, oh my God, I might have something like this at home. So it kind of is going to encourage a very different area of aesthetics at the home, looking at decorative objects very differently.
And hopefully this is going to help provide some confidence and some encouragement to the ceramic artists that are in India. At the museum ourselves, we've started collecting for our permanent collection a lot of these artists featured in the book. While the exhibition was entirely borrowed, we decided that it's worth putting together a collection. So that's been happening, and hopefully this impact is across various sectors. So, but thank you. And there's a question, I believe, since the okay. Anyway, so that we can answer. But thanks to all the speakers. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Sindhura, for putting in. I know how much effort went in back and forth. It took us 3 years to produce a book. Let the pandemic alone. That was that had nothing to do
like
with
it. It's
the timeline. But yeah,
it's an amazing achievement.
Yes, and of course to Arjun Dogra, the photographer who manages to capture these pieces as close to real as possible. And of course to Kristine Annapurna. Annapurna was our godmother for the project. I have to thank her. I know I've stressed her out a lot throughout the project, but she's been a champion.
Yes, we must thank Kristine and Vaishnavi Ramnathan, who was so amazing
Absolutely.
to put this all together. Thank you so much to all of you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations, everyone.
Very much.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.